What's going on, family? I'm Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. Now we're talking about the 10 greatest black light heavyweights of all times. And I talked about Kid Norfolk, William Ward. And Kid Norfolk was an outstanding fighter. I often ask myself, who was the number one black fighter in the light heavyweight division that was most avoided? And who would have made a great light heavyweight champion of that bunch? Lee Anderson comes to mind. Kid Norfolk comes to mind. Cincinnati Cobra. Ezzard Charles comes to mind. Of course, Sam Langford, the Boston Bone Crusher, comes to mind. And there were quite a few others. But Lee Anderson and Kid Norfolk were members of the second wave of Black Murderers Row. Now, who also was on that membership? Well, you had the Lightheavyweight Shadow, George Godfrey. He would defeat Larry Gans for the colored heavyweight championship title. That title was relinquished from Harry Wills. It was actually taken away from him. 1926, Harry Wills would take on Jack Sharkey, and he'd be disqualified for excessive holding and or low blows. So they would strip Harry Wills of his title. Well, the Lightheavyweight Shadow, George Godfrey, would take on Larry Gans of Canada for that title. And George Godfrey would defeat Larry Gans, and he would become the colored heavyweight champion. Well, he was also a member of the second wave of Black Murderers Row. You would also have Allentown Joe Gans, Joey Hicks. You would have Panama Joe Gans. You would have Leo Patterson, who was the lightweight champion, the AEF, America's Expeditionary Forces. He would defeat Bushy Graham. Leo Patterson was some fighter. You would also have Leo Johnson, who's the colored lightweight champion. He would get a shot with Benny Leonard for his lightweight championship crown. But he was also a member of the second wave of Black Murderers Row. You also had Harry Smith, who was known as the Harlem Thunderbolt. He was a middleweight. And he was a phenomenal fighter. He was a colored middleweight champion. He would defeat the Pride of Harlem, who was also a member of the second wave of Black Murderers Row. And his name was Jack McVeigh. And Jack McVeigh and Harry Smith would face one another in 1929, the Harlem Athletic Club, and that would be some fight. But these men would be well deserving of a shot. Now, Lee Anderson would face George Robinson 2 separate occasions, February 8th, 1916, and then February 25th, 1916 as well. Now, he would lose to George Robinson in 2 rounds in 1916 on February 8th, but he would defeat him in 8 rounds on February 25th, 1916. He would also take on a fighter by the name of Rufus Williams, December 26th, 1917. Fought him in Phoenix, Arizona, and defeated him in 10 rounds. Now, Lee Anderson was a very hard puncher, and he was the kind of a fighter that would not give up. He would face fighters such as Kid Leo, March 19th, 1920. He fought Leo in Sacramento, California, and he would stop him in 1 round. He would also take on Frankie Jones, April 14th, 1920. He would defeat Frankie Jones in Oakland, California. Stopped him in 3 rounds. He would fight fighters such as Sam Langford, October 20th, in Portland, Oregon, and he would defeat him in 10 rounds. Now, Sam Langford I saw his better days, but it was still a very good victory for Lee Anderson. Now, when you talk about good victories, you're also talking about fights that happened between Lee Anderson and Kid Savage. That was a 20-round draw in 1921. Many thought that Lee Anderson had defeated Kid Savage. But Lee Anderson would also take on Sam Langford 4 other occasions in 1921. He fought him August 12th and September 5th of 1921. He fought him again November 24th and December 7th of 1921. He would take on Kid Norfolk September 11th, 1922 in Boston, Massachusetts. He would lose to him in 10 rounds. Like I stated in my opening statement, Lee Anderson and Kid Norfolk would face each other 4 times between 1922 and 1924. I told you that Lee Anderson was a late breaker in Harlem. And if you owed the mob or the racketeers any money, and you heard a knock on the door at 3 o'clock in the morning, chances are it would be Lee Anderson. Lee Anderson was something else. But I just wanted to give you somewhat of an idea of one of the opponents of Kid Norfolk. And once again, was Kid Norfolk an opponent of Lee Anderson? One other factor that I want to acknowledge, besides taking on Jamaica Kid January 21st, 1924, and having a 12-round draw in Zanesville, Ohio, besides March 29th, 1924, taking on Theodore Tiger Flowers in Madison Square Garden in New York. He would lose to him in 12 rounds. But there's no disgrace there, because Theodore Tiger Flowers would become the first black middleweight champion in 1926 when he took on the Pittsburgh Windmill, Harry Greb. But Leo Patterson, although he was a lightweight and he took on Bushy Graham, would spar with Lee Anderson as well. Lee Anderson would take on Theodore Tiger Flowers twice in 1925, June 11th and June 20th. Fought him both times in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and he lost to him twice, 10 rounds, and he was stopped in 2 rounds. He would take on Al Road, August 15th, 1925. He would take him on in Brooklyn, New York, and he would lose to him on a foul in 3 rounds. He would also take on Bearcat Wright, December 12th. And he would defeat him in New York. You know, when you look at the career of Lee Anderson, the wins and losses and things obviously that took place during those years, you cannot state that Lee Anderson was not a phenomenal fighter. I mean, after all, he would take on some really tough and rugged fighters. Cyclone Turner. He would take on Willie Meade, Billy Misk. In fact, he fought Billy Misk February 9th, 1921. And he would have a 12-round draw with him. Shout out to Lee Anderson. He's not on my top 10 list, but he was worth mentioning because he was a phenomenal fighter. I'm Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. All great fights and all great fighters will never be forgotten on my channel. My God, Jeff Smith, September 24th, 1923. Jack Taylor, November 1st, 1923. Jamaica Kid, November 27th, 1923. Jim Barry, 1922, I think it was, November 20th. Kid Norfolk, December 22nd, 1922. Theodore Tiger Flowers, September 22nd, 1924. What a fighter. Thanks for listening.